All right. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about, briefly, about Medicare and Medicare supplemental insurance. So let's talk about those a little bit. So for Medicare, Medicare is actually divided up into several parts. We have Part A, Part B, Part C, and Part D. So let's talk about each of these parts and what they relate to. Part A for Medicare is covering hospital, skilled nursing, home health, hospice, those kinds of expenses. So hospitalizations or things like that's going to trigger Part A. Part B is what you would think of for basically your typical doctor visits, that sort of ongoing medical spending and so forth. Part C is Medicare Advantage plans. Now, those are private, and they may cover additional things at an additional cost, and involve more deductibles and copays and things like that, which we'll come back to that in a moment. Part D is for prescription drug coverage. So if we're looking at those, Part A, think hospitalization, you're at some kind of or skilled nursing facility, home health in some cases, hospice. So a lot of Part A pertains to you are at some sort of a facility in some cases, receiving a lot of care. Think hospitalizations, that kind of thing. Part B was more, I go to my regular doctor, or I had to have some kind of a scan performed or something like that. So it's not a hospitalization, but I had to have X-rays or things like that typically. Part C is interesting. So the Medicare Advantage plans are private plans, and kind of what you wind up doing is if you do a Medicare Advantage plan, what you're kind of trading is you're kind of trading the Part A and the Part B standard Medicare coverages for this Medicare Advantage plan. So basically, you can either do sort of the standard, just run-of-the-mill plain vanilla Medicare Part A and Part B, or you do another flavor, the Medicare Advantage plan, but that's done through a private company. And it may actually cover additional things, which is kind of nice, but it covers those typically at an additional cost, not so nice, and often involves more deductibles. So if you are comparing them, you may have certain sort of extra benefits that a Medicare Advantage plan may pay for, but they may charge you more in copays and deductibles for things that you might have paid very little for under just the plain generic vanilla Part A, Part B Medicare. So from that standpoint, if you're willing to or perhaps you have savings and can handle some of the miscellaneous additional things that standard Medicare wouldn't cover, the standard Medicare coverage is probably better at lower cost for the big stuff like the hospitalizations and some of those doctor visits and scans and things like that. So basically kind of what's happening with the Medicare Advantage versus under Part C versus Parts A and Part B is basically you're sort of getting more a fancier policy that covers more things, but you're paying more for it, and you're going to wind up paying more probably for ongoing typical copays, deductibles, things like that, for a lot of things than you might have under just the plain vanilla Medicare of Part A and Part B. So that's something to weigh very, very carefully before you do a Medicare Advantage plan. What exactly would I be getting in return that's a benefit to me? What are the additional costs that I would now have that I wouldn't have by just sticking with your sort of plain vanilla Part A, Part B, and so forth. Now, one of the things that is worth noting is that with Medicare, there are some coverage gaps. So there's some things that maybe you were used to having your insurance company pay for that they won't necessarily pay for. So they don't necessarily cover everything that you would have expected, or that you've grown accustomed to. And generally, there's sort of a lack of out-of-pocket maximum. So they cover a lot of things, and they have pretty good amount of coverage, but it doesn't necessarily have the like out-of-pocket maximums that you might have been used to under a insurance policy that was through your employer or something like that. And that does reinforce the fact that deductibles and coinsurance do still apply. So you're still going to have deductibles. It may be a lot lower than it was before, but you're still going to have it. Coinsurance, that's still going to be a thing. So you're going to be needing to think about how much I need to pay for the different services and so forth. So those don't go away under Medicare. But again, you want to look at the coverages and things like that to see if there are any challenges that are concerning to you. And that's where we get to our last little item for this particular topic, and that is Medicare supplemental coverages or Medigap coverages. So basically what's happening here is Medigap is not the same thing as Medicare Advantage. Medicare Advantage plans are private plans that basically pretty much you are sort of replacing that plain vanilla Part A and Part B with the Medicare Advantage. Medigap or Medicare supplemental coverages, you got Part A and Part B. I'm doing the Medigap coverage, which is additional coverage that basically helps to cover some of the gaps and things that Part A and Part B just, they aren't going to cover. So it's extra insurance that you pay for to basically kind of fill some of the gaps that the standard Part A and Part B under Medicare wouldn't necessarily cover. Whether you would want to do that, again, depends upon kind of your financial situation, how much risk you're willing to take on, and so forth. Interestingly, so for the Medigap kind of coverage, typically what will happen is you enroll for Medicare when you reach a certain age. You enroll in Medicare, and when you do that, you have an enrollment period, and so you essentially that creates basically an initial open enrollment period that you could opt to engage in selecting a Medigap coverage. If you enroll outside of that initial open enrollment period, then pre-existing conditions could actually prevent coverage in the Medigap policies. And that's true under the Affordable Care Act. Okay, so basically, if you're thinking, Medicare, I look at the details, I look at the policies, look at what it's going to cover, and given my unique financial situation, my unique medical situation, there are certain things that I'd like to have a little bit more coverage for certain areas that Medicare has a gap in. And you're thinking you want to do a Medigap, well, you better do that as soon as you sign up for Medicare. Because if you miss that initial open enrollment period right after you sign up for Medicare, that triggers essentially an open enrollment period for Medigap. So if you miss it, then you could actually be denied the Medigap coverage on the basis of the pre-existing conditions. So that's something to be careful about for that. Okay, hopefully this video has been helpful, and thank you for watching, and have a great day.